Okay, now let's talk about some of the web forms. So actually, forms also provide a structured way to collect the information from the web page visitor. Maybe they can put their first name, last name, address, email, and so on. Sometimes visitors, they complete the web form when they need to register for an account or even to make a purchase. So, and normally the businesses, they actually use the form to gather the customer information and store it in some databases so that for the future they can actually use it or maybe use it for marketing purposes and things like that. So now let's talk about form controls. So form consists of a starting form tag and as well as ending form tag. All form elements, they are contained within the form, and also you use the closing form. Input controls are used within the form element to collect visitor information. The input form is also, we can call it an interactive mechanism in which the user can actually enter the text or make selection on a form. A label is text describing the type of information to enter with an input control. So most of the controls in a HTML form, they are by using the type attribute of the input element. So in order to define the other controls, we use separate elements such as text area, and actually also we use maybe the select element. The two input control forms are basically the data input and as well as text input control. So there are two types of control that we have, data input and text input. So when a web page visitor uses a data input control to make a selection or perform a command, a data input control can be maybe a radio button or a checkbox or a submit button. The text input control, it accepts text such as name, date, and password, and is called an input field to it. So this table lists the input type for an input control. So the input type could be button, checkbox, date, time, file, email, and then in here you have basically a description and an example that you can use it in your web pages. So regardless of the specific type, each input control has attributes that are basically used more frequently than others. Name, which identifies the specific information that is being sent when the form is submitted for processing. An ID, which provides a unique ID for the element, use the ID attribute with the input control. And value, which specifies the value of an input element, and it can actually vary depending on input type that you have. For basically text, password, and some kind of a hidden control, the value attributes define the default value. For checkbox, radio, and image control, it specifies the data submitted with the form when the control is selected. And for button, reset, and submit control, the value attributes define the text on the button. All the controls except the text area also have a value attribute. For a text area field, no value attribute is possible because of the variety of the input that the person can put in there. So the common input control used for the form includes the text, password, email, maybe checkbox, selection, submit, reset, and etc. The text box, it's the text control for a small amount of text. Password text box is a password control for entering the password. Email text box is an email control for entering an email address. Then we also have telephone text box, which for entering a telephone number, date text box for entering a date, and text area text box for larger amount of text, maybe comments and things like that that they want to put. So the text input controls have two frequently used attributes. The size, which can determine the width of the control in the character, maybe, and you can have maximum certain number of character, and the maximum length, which specifies the maximum number of character that can be accepted. So for the text input, you have these two attributes, the size and the maximum length. So let's look at the example here. The example here, you can see the last name, the input last name, the type is text. So we are identify the size as 25 characters. And then for the password, you have, of course, the input is the password. And again, you identify size. Remember, because when, for example, if somebody, like, let's say, like you are entering in a form, like maybe you are creating user and a password, and if for your password you enter something very short, maybe it's not very secure. So maybe you want to have at least 8 characters that you need to enter. So this depends to the designer how they're actually going to design it. And then we have the password control, which is like a text control, because it can actually provide a text box for a single line input. The password, a visitor enters that password in there. Then we have the email control, which is also a text box where the visitor can enter the email address. Maybe some browser, they can validate that email address in the proper format before submitting it. It might require them to, if they don't put, for example, @ sign, like if it's not in an email format, it's not going to take it. And then the tel control is a text box where visitor enter a telephone number. And then the date format, the control of it is it accepts a date. Again, some browser, they can display calendar when a visitor taps, or maybe they click on the date control, so it pops the calendar into it. And then we have the text area control, which create a text box that allow a multiple line of input. The text area control are also being used to collect more than a single line of text from our web page. In order to create the text area control, we use the text area element instead of the input element. So remember, if you want to have multiple lines, you are using the text area element. The text area element has also two primary attributes, which actually sets the size of the text control. The row, which specifies the number of row or maybe number of lines that the text area control has, and then the columns, which sets the width of the text area control as the number of columns, with each column containing basically one character. So now let's look at this example. So in this example, you can see the basically we are using label. So we are actually using the label, and we are using the text area. We are using rows and columns in there. As we mentioned, there are two attributes. So in here, the text area can control 3 lines, but it can each be like 100 characters. So the visitor cannot go over that. The next thing that we are going to talk about is the checkbox control, which allow the visitor to select items basically from a list of 1 or more choices. Each choice appears with a graphical box, which can be checked, selected, or unchecked. By default, all the checkboxes are actually deselected. To set a particular checkbox to be pre-selected as default, we use the check attribute and value. We put checked equals checked if we want it to be checked within the input tag. So in this example here, so this line is actually you are creating a checkbox for Apple choice, which is selected or checked when the web page opens up. This other line, the fruit line that we have here, shows the peach choices. So the checkbox, the choices that you are going to have. Another control is a radio control. It can limit the web page visitor to only have one choice from a list of choices. Each choice has a radio button or option button, which can appear as an open circle. This is kind of like by default. When the visitor selected one of the radio buttons, all the other buttons are automatically deselected, so they can only choose one. By default, all the radio buttons are deselected. So if you want to have a particular button as default to be checked, again, you are using the checked in the attribute within the input tag. So in this example here, you can see you are creating two radio controls. So the car, and then you are actually having the default as check. And then you have another one, truck, and you have the value as a truck in here. So a visitor can choose to rent a car or actually a truck. So the car button we already put as checked. So the car button already selected when the forms is opened. So you can, so the user can actually change it. They say, no, I want to select this. Then this one becomes unchecked. But as a default, because we put this checked here, it is checked. Another control that we want to talk about is the select control. So the select control actually creates a selection menu from which the visitor can actually make one or more choices that is suitable. And a select control is normally suitable when a limited number of choices are available. It can appear on form as a text box with a list arrow. The user tab or clicks the list arrow to view all the choices in the menu. So the default choices appear first in the menu, and it's highlighted to indicate that it is selected. So in this example, this is actually showing you the select control. So the selection menu has 4 options, as you can see here: Pandora, Internet Radio, Live 365, and Django, with Pandora appearing as the selected option in there. The submit control and the rest control create the submit and reset buttons. The submit button, can send the form information to the appropriate location for actually processing. When a web page visitor taps on or clicks the submit button, the name of each control and the value of its data are being sent to a server to be processed. A submit control is created like this. So input type submit, and then you will put the value submit. The reset button clears any input entered in the form, resetting the input controls to their default. So you can put the input type reset and then the value as well to reset. So this figure 834 shows you an example of a form with several input control, such as text, email, telephone, date, select, and as well as text area. And then you have your submit button, submit control in there as well. And also you have your select control in there and your labels. Form labels identify type of information to enter into or select from an input control. Basically, they are added to a form using the label element, and they connect them to the controls, include the for attribute with the same value as input control ID value. So let's look at an example here. So in here we put label for F name, the first name, and then the label, close your label tag. And then the input type of that is text, maybe your first name, and then your ID is your first name. So you use the for attribute with the same value as the input control, and then the ID value as well. So this is basically, this table shows you there are a lot of common form attributes that a lot of them now they are being into the HTML5 attributes element. So sometimes some of these might not be supported by all the major browsers because they're kind of new, but you have an option of all of these kind of the attribute that you can use, and in here you see the description and the code example. It just depends what you want to use it for. So these are basically the attributes of the HTML tags that you can use on your forms. The next step of the form is actually, after we create it, is the form processing part of it. So after we create our form, we need to identify how to process the form and when to submit it. We use the action attribute of the form to specify the action that the browser takes when submitting our form. Browser can actually send email entered in the form to a database on a web server, or send by email to an email address. Many websites, they use the form processing software tools from the web server. Another common way to transfer is to use the CGI script, a program that's written in a programming language such as PHP or Perl scripting, and communicates with the web server. The CGI script sends the information on the web page form to the server for the processing. The method attribute for the form tag specifies how to send the data entered in the form to the server to be processed. HTML provides two ways to send the data, the get method and post method. The get method appends the name value pair to URL indicated in the action attribute. You need to actually use cautious when using the get method. Some web server limit the size of the URL, so you might actually have a risk of doing that. So the post method separates a data file with the name value, pairs it to the URL or email address indicated in the action attribute. The post method is actually more common method because it can be used to send actually sensitive information, and you don't have any size limitation. So we prefer to use the post method. So how to use that? You can put form, method, post, and then you put the action, and it's normally the form, it's a PHP file. So when you learn in the PHP class, I teach the data-driven website, you will see that you can actually create a form much easier. So the next thing that we are going to talk about, we are going to actually style our form. You can apply CSS style to form for the same reason you want to style other web page elements, basically maybe to improve the appearance of it and usefulness of your form. So as with table, consider forms in the context of also responsive design. You want to actually create something that can actually work on a small devices, on a maybe a mobile device as well. So in this example here, you can see that basically you are using some sort of a style in here. So your the first one is basically your comment, and then you are putting the style rule for your form. You add a background color, the padding to it, and then again inside your form in the paragraph you might want to have a different color. So you apply this style rule for the form paragraph element in here. So this is basically, you know, once you apply those style, your form will have this type of a background color, and again you apply this to the paragraph as well. So it is very useful to actually use the style to style your form as well in your CSS file. So that's it for this chapter. So in your assignment, you are actually going to work on lab 1 and lab 2. Again, same as previous assignments. So you are going to create a table and a form, and it is very important. Like, these two things are very important on a website, so try to learn them as much as possible. So try, creating your adding some style to your CSS file, and also creating your form, and also creating your tables. So you will also apply these later on in your profile website that you have created. So it is very useful to know these topics. That's it for this chapter. I hope you have enjoyed it. Have a good day. Bye-bye.